Ethan Caldwell thought he was boarding a luxury cruise with his mistress and leaving his 7-month pregnant wife at home. He was wrong. Madeline Brooks was already aboard, watching from above, and Ethan had no idea the ship belonged to the company she controlled. But the affair was only the first betrayal waiting at sea. Stay to the end, because the moment Ethan learns whose ship he is standing on is not even the worst shock of the voyage. Subscribe for more emotional stories about loyalty and consequences. Madeline's first decision was the one Ethan would never understand until it was too late. "Don't stop my husband. I want to see who he brought onto my ship." Madeline Brooks said it so quietly that Captain Robert Hale almost thought he had misunderstood her. Outside the tinted glass of the private observation lounge, Miami burned gold beneath the setting sun. The Aurelia Crown rested against the terminal like a floating palace. 14 decks of white steel, polished brass, private balconies, and glass that caught the ocean light like diamonds. Then a black SUV stopped beside the gangway. Maddie's hand moved instinctively over her 7-month belly. The baby kicked. Once. Hard. "Mrs. Brooks," the captain said carefully, "I can't have security deny them boarding." No one word. No anger. No tears. Just something colder. Below them, Ethan Caldwell stepped from the SUV in a navy suit worth more than some families paid in rent for 3 months. At 38, he had perfected the appearance of a man who believed every room would eventually belong to him. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Vanessa Reed climbed out after him. Slim, elegant, chestnut hair falling over one shoulder. A white designer dress hugged her body as Ethan placed his hand against the small of her back. Not accidentally, not professionally, possessively. Maddie stopped breathing. For 7 months, she had told herself there might be another explanation. Late meetings, locked phones, business trips that somehow required new cologne. The sudden way Ethan had stopped touching her belly when their daughter moved. She had collected suspicions the way people collected rainwater during a drought. Carefully, desperately, never enough to prove a storm was coming. Now the storm was walking up her gangway in 6-inch heels. Vanessa laughed at something Ethan whispered. He leaned close to her ear. Too close. Captain Hale looked away. Maddie didn't. A soft chime sounded from the captain's service radio. The embarkation manager was calling with a routine update about a high-profile guest. "Mr. Caldwell and Ms. Reed have cleared document review," the manager said. Mr. Caldwell also asked that his investor guests be reminded about tomorrow's private presentation. A pause followed. He told Ms. Reed, "This is just the beginning," and said she should wait until she saw the suite. Captain Hale did not repeat the words. He did not need to. Maddie had heard enough through the open operations call. Her fingers tightened over her stomach. "They're sweet." Maddie almost laughed. Instead, she remembered Ethan that morning, kissing her forehead before leaving their house. "Important investor retreat, sweetheart. 3 days. Try to rest. For the baby." The lie had sounded so gentle. That was what hurt most. Cruel men did not always shout. Sometimes they kissed your forehead before taking another woman on vacation. "Should I notify the executive crew?" Captain Hale asked. "They already know I'm aboard." "And Mr. Caldwell?" Maddie looked through the glass as Ethan handed his passport to the boarding officer. "No," the captain studied her expression. "You don't want him told?" "Not yet." Below, Vanessa slipped her arm through Ethan's as cameras flashed for the luxury cruise welcome photographs. Maddie watched her husband smile. A real smile. One she had not seen directed at her in months. Her eyes burned, but she refused to blink. Ethan Caldwell believed he had boarded the Aurelia Crown as a millionaire preparing to close the biggest deal of his life. He believed his pregnant wife was home. He believed Vanessa was his future. And most dangerously of all, he believed this ship belonged to strangers. Maddie lowered her hand from the glass. "Let him enjoy tonight," she whispered. Captain Hale frowned. "Why?" For the first time, Maddie smiled. "Because some men needed to walk all the way into the truth before the door closed behind them." Maddie could have ended Ethan's evening with a phone call, but that would have answered only one question: whether she had the power to stop him. She needed a different answer: who her husband had become when he believed she was nowhere near him. She would not interfere with the captain's safety authority, invent charges, or manufacture a public scene. She would simply stop smoothing the road in front of Ethan. Brooks Atlantic would protect its name, and Ethan would be free to make his own choices. For the first time in their marriage, Maddie would not rescue him from what those choices revealed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but the owner's suite is not available." Ethan's smile disappeared. The reception officer stood behind a curved marble desk beneath a chandelier shaped like falling crystal rain. Beyond the glass walls, Miami's skyline was already dissolving into orange light as the Aurelia Crown prepared to leave port. Vanessa leaned against Ethan's arm, champagne flute in hand. "Not available?" Ethan repeated. His voice stayed calm. "That was usually when people became nervous. I reserved the best accommodation on this ship." "You reserved the Royal Ocean Suite, sir," the officer replied politely. "The owner's suite cannot be booked." Ethan glanced toward Vanessa. She had spent the last 20 minutes photographing everything: the grand staircase, the champagne fountain, the polished brass elevators. He had promised her something better than luxury. He had promised her access. "Call your manager." The officer hesitated. Upstairs, behind tinted glass, Maddie saw the scene on a standard public area operations feed used by the hospitality team. One hand rested beneath her belly. The other held a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. Captain Hale stood beside her. "You knew he would ask for it?" Maddie gave a small, tired smile. "Ethan always asks for the one thing he's told he can't have." On the monitor, the hotel director arrived. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand there's been some confusion." "No confusion," Ethan said. "I want the owner's suite. I'm afraid that suite is permanently reserved." "For whom?" The director paused. "For the owner." Vanessa laughed. It was light, careless. "Maybe the owner is scared someone prettier will sleep in her bed." Silence filled the observation lounge. Captain Hale slowly turned toward Maddie. Maddie did not move, but something changed in her face. Not pain exactly. Recognition. The kind that comes when humiliation becomes so complete there is nothing left to misunderstand. Vanessa had no idea the woman she was mocking was 6 decks above her. No idea the bed she wanted belonged to Maddie. No idea the ship's hospitality team treated Maddie as the controlling owner's representative for guest service decisions, while Captain Hale retained full authority over navigation and safety. "Should I have them removed?" Hale asked. No, Maddie's answer came immediately. "Give them the suite next door." The captain frowned. "You want them beside your private quarters?" "I want Ethan comfortable." That answer disturbed him more. Downstairs, Ethan smiled when the hotel director returned with the alternative. "The adjoining royal residence is available, sir. Complimentary upgrade." Ethan adjusted his cuff. "Better." Vanessa kissed his cheek. "I told you they'd figure out who you are." "Who you are?" The hospitality director repeated the remark during the open service call, and it reached Maddie like a blade wrapped in silk. For 11 years, she had watched Ethan build himself into the man standing there. She remembered the cheap apartment, the rejected proposals, the nights he had whispered that one day people would know his name, and she had believed in him before anyone else did. Now he stood on her family's ship, holding another woman, convinced his money had opened the door. The Aurelia Crown gave a deep horn blast. The sound rolled across the harbor like thunder. Departure. There would be no easy exit now. Maddie watched Vanessa place her hand over Ethan's as they walked toward the elevators. Then Ethan stopped. He pulled out his phone. For one terrible second, Maddie thought he might call her. He did. Her screen lit up. "Ethan." Maddie stared at his name, then answered. "Hi." His voice became warm instantly. "Hey, sweetheart. Just checking on my girls." Maddie closed her eyes. Vanessa was still visible beside him on the monitor. "I'm fine." "Good. Long meetings tonight. Don't wait up." Maddie looked at the ocean widening between the ship and the city. "I won't." He hung up. Vanessa took his hand again. And as the elevators closed around them, Maddie finally understood something that frightened her more than the affair. Ethan wasn't ashamed of lying to her. He was comfortable doing it. She placed the phone beside the untouched tea. "Captain." "Yes, Mrs. Brooks." "Make sure nobody tells him I'm here." Hale studied her. "For how long?" Maddie looked toward the darkening sea. "Until I know exactly what my husband came aboard my ship to do. He is planning to leave you after the baby is born." Maddie did not answer. The sentence came from Elena Park, longtime counsel to the Brooks family office, during a secure video call from Maddie's private cabin. Beyond the balcony doors, the Atlantic stretched black and endless beneath the moon. A cup of tea cooled untouched beside her. One hand supported the weight of her 7-month belly. The other rested on the edge of the desk. "How do you know?" she asked. Elena opened a document on the shared screen. A financial advisor retained by Ethan's personal team contacted the Brooks family office this afternoon. He asked for confirmation of several trust distributions that appear on your joint tax records. Maddie's face went still. Why would he need that? Elena hesitated. Because his office is preparing a post-delivery marital separation analysis. For a few seconds, Maddie heard only the low vibration of the ship beneath her feet. Post-delivery. Yes. Elena enlarged the request. The language was careful and professional. Mr. Caldwell prefers to defer formal separation proceedings until after the child is born and the immediate recovery period has passed. Counsel requests information regarding Mrs. Caldwell's separate family interests for preliminary asset classification. Maddie read the sentence twice, then a third time. The nursery Ethan had helped choose. The prenatal appointments he sometimes attended. The evenings he rested a hand on her stomach and asked whether their daughter had kicked. All of it had existed beside a private calendar counting down to the day he intended to leave. When did his team first start asking questions? Maddie said, 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. She remembered a night in their kitchen when Ethan returned after midnight, carrying the faint scent of perfume. She had asked where he had been. He sighed and told her pregnancy was making everything feel larger than it was. Maddie had apologized. That memory hurt differently now. Not because he had lied. Because he had taught her to distrust what she could see. Elena continued. There is something else. The advisor attached a business deck because several projected transactions depend on what he called Brooks family alignment. A second file appeared. Caldwell Coastal Collection. Luxury resorts. Private terminals. Exclusive cruise transfers. Then Maddie saw the Brooks Atlantic Voyages logo beside Ethan's company. Her breathing slowed. There is no partnership. We know. No memorandum. None. No letter of intent. None. No board authorization. Absolutely not. Elena moved to another page. Hundreds of millions of dollars in projected expansion value depended on passenger access Ethan did not control. The language avoided saying a final contract existed, but it repeatedly suggested Brooks Atlantic support was effectively secured through family ties. Maddie stared at the screen. The affair was personal betrayal. This was something else. Ethan was using the marriage he planned to abandon as leverage for a deal his wife had never approved. Her phone vibrated. A message from the hospitality director appeared. Mr. Caldwell has confirmed a private investor presentation tomorrow before the captain's reception. Subject: Brooks Atlantic Strategic Partnership. Elena watched Maddie read it. We can issue a written denial tonight. Maddie remained silent. We can contact his counsel before he says anything to investors. Still nothing. Maddie. The baby moved beneath her ribs. Maddie placed her palm over the movement. Prepare a factual clarification, she said. Do not send it yet. Elena's expression tightened. You want him to make the presentation? I want to hear exactly what he represents as fact. And if he crosses the line? Then Brooks Atlantic corrects the record immediately. Maddie looked through the glass toward the dark water. Somewhere on her ship, Ethan was drinking champagne with Vanessa, believing his pregnant wife was home and financially dependent on him. He was wrong about almost everything. But he was right about one thing. By tomorrow night, everything would change. Ms. Brooks, the bridge is ready for you. The words were spoken softly, but Maddie felt their weight. Not Mrs. Caldwell. Not Ethan's wife. Ms. Brooks. Her own name. She stepped from the private corridor into an elevator that required a black access card unavailable to passengers. The doors closed behind her with a quiet metallic sigh. 7 months pregnant, dressed in a simple cream maternity dress, Maddie hardly looked like the woman responsible for the floating city around her. That had always been her advantage. When the elevator opened onto the navigation deck, conversation stopped. Good evening, Ms. Brooks. Ma'am. Welcome back. Officers nodded as she passed. No surprise. No confusion. They knew exactly who she was. Captain Hale joined her near the panoramic windows. We're maintaining 18 knots, he said. Weather should remain clear through tomorrow evening. And the fuel projections? Within target. A chief engineer approached carrying a tablet. MS. Brooks, the efficiency upgrade you approved in Rotterdam is performing 6% above forecast. Maddie studied the figures. Good. Send the full report to Atlantic Operations before midnight. Yes, ma'am. 2 decks below. Ethan was probably explaining luxury cruise economics to investors. The thought almost made her smile. He had always enjoyed explaining industries to people he assumed understood less than he did. Especially her. A memory surfaced. 5 years earlier, Ethan had been standing in their kitchen surrounded by financial projections for Caldwell Resorts. His company was struggling then. Banks were nervous. Investors were disappearing. Maddie had glanced over the documents. "You're targeting the wrong coastal markets," she had said. "Your occupancy assumptions depend too heavily on seasonal travelers." Ethan laughed. Not cruelly. Almost affectionately. "Maddie, sweetheart, you were never built for business." She remembered going silent. 3 days later, one of Brooks Atlantic's longtime investment partners received a private call from her. 2 weeks later, Ethan secured the financing that saved his company. He called it the greatest negotiation of his career. Maddie never corrected him. That had been her mistake. Not helping him. Letting him believe help had never existed. She moved deeper into the restricted operations corridor. Everywhere she went, doors opened. The medical director greeted her. The hospitality chief handed her tomorrow's gala schedule. The executive chef asked whether she still preferred lemon tea before evening meetings. Small things. Ordinary things. Except none of them fit the woman Ethan believed he had married. To him, Brooks was merely Maddie's maiden name. A family that had once made money somewhere near the ocean. Old trusts. Old stories. Nothing important. He had never asked deeper questions because Ethan only investigated things he believed could benefit him. Captain Hale stopped beside a wall displaying photographs of the company's vessels. At the center was the Aurelia Crown. Beneath it hung a smaller photograph. Maddie at 24 beside her grandfather, William Brooks, on the day the ship's construction contract was signed. "You could have told him," Hale said. Maddie looked at the photograph. "I wanted him to love the woman before he learned what she owned." "And did he?" Her silence answered. The captain lowered his eyes. Maddie turned toward the dark ocean. Brooks Atlantic Voyages had never belonged to Ethan's investors. It had never belonged to some distant corporation. The company controlling the Aurelia Crown belonged to the Brooks family, and the controlling vote belonged to Madeline Brooks. Her phone vibrated. A message from the hospitality director. "Mr. Caldwell has requested a private investor presentation tomorrow before the captain's reception. He says it concerns a partnership with Brooks Atlantic." Maddie read it once. Then again. Her expression changed. Ethan wasn't merely cheating aboard her ship. He was planning something. And whatever it was, he had just made the mistake of bringing it directly to the woman he thought knew nothing about business. "You should be at home." Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. But Maddie heard every word. So did Vanessa. The captain's reception had transformed the Aurelia Crown's grand ballroom into a cathedral of money and light. Crystal chandeliers burned above polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the panoramic windows while investors moved between champagne towers and silver trays of caviar. Then Ethan saw his wife. 7 months pregnant. Blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. A simple midnight blue maternity gown. No diamonds. No entourage. Just Maddie, standing near the center of the room with one hand resting gently over their unborn daughter. His face changed instantly. Shock. Confusion. Then anger. "What are you doing here?" Maddie looked at him. "Good evening, Ethan." Vanessa tightened her fingers around his arm. "You didn't tell me she was coming." "I didn't know." Ethan stepped closer. His smile returned for the investors watching nearby, but his eyes became cold. "How did you even get aboard?" Maddie almost answered. Almost. Instead, she let the question remain between them. Ethan leaned toward her. "You need to leave." "Why?" "Because this is business." His jaw tightened. "Important business." Maddie glanced around the ballroom. "My being here makes that difficult?" "You being here makes everything difficult." There it was. Not concern. Not embarrassment over Vanessa. Annoyance. As though his pregnant wife had interrupted a presentation instead of discovered him traveling publicly with his mistress. Vanessa gave Maddie a slow look from head to toe. "I'm sure pregnancy can make women emotional." Maddie turned toward her. Vanessa smiled. "Maybe you misunderstood what you saw." Ethan said nothing. That silence told Maddie more than any confession could. Vanessa continued. "Ethan invited me because I'm involved in tomorrow's partnership announcement." "Tonight," Ethan corrected quickly. Maddie's eyes moved to him. "Tonight." So he had accelerated the plan. Ethan noticed the change in her expression. "Listen to me." he said quietly. I'm about to secure something that could change our lives. Don't create a scene. Our lives. Maddie nearly admired the arrogance. You're announcing the Brooks Atlantic partnership? Ethan froze for half a second. How do you know about that? I heard. From whom? Maddie smiled faintly. Does it matter? His irritation deepened. The negotiations are sensitive. Negotiations. There had never been any. Vanessa folded her arms. Ethan, maybe security should escort her back to her cabin. Maddie glanced toward the ballroom entrance. 2 security officers stood there. Neither moved. Vanessa noticed. Excuse me, she called, lifting one manicured hand. Could someone help us? The officers looked past her, toward Maddie, waiting. Ethan did not understand what he was seeing. Not yet. He took Maddie's elbow and guided her several steps away. You're embarrassing me. She looked down at his hand. He released her. You have no idea how important tonight is, he whispered. These people didn't come here for family drama. No, Maddie's voice remained calm. They came to hear you. Exactly. Then you should speak. Ethan stared at her. Something in her calmness unsettled him. Maddie, you don't belong here. The words landed softly. But unlike his lies, they did not hurt. Not anymore. Maddie looked beyond him. Captain Hale had entered the ballroom. Beside him stood 3 members of the Brooks Atlantic board. All waiting. All watching her. The stage lights brightened. A microphone was placed at the podium. Ethan exhaled, straightened his jacket, and recovered the smile he used whenever money was listening. Stay out of the way, he murmured. Then he walked toward the stage. Vanessa followed. Maddie remained exactly where she was. For the next 12 minutes, Ethan Caldwell was going to tell a room full of investors that Brooks Atlantic Voyages had chosen him as its newest partner. Maddie would not interrupt him. She would not correct him. She would let him finish every sentence. Because sometimes the cleanest way to expose a lie was to give it a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we discuss the future, there is someone in this room you should meet. Ethan's smile faltered. The voice did not belong to him. It belonged to Charles Whitmore, chairman of the Brooks Atlantic board. He had stepped onto the stage without warning. Around the ballroom, conversations died one by one until only the faint hum of the ship's engines remained beneath the silence. Ethan stood beside the podium, one hand still resting on the presentation remote. Behind him, the giant screen displayed the title he had chosen, Caldwell Resorts plus Brooks Atlantic Voyages, a partnership that did not exist. Vanessa sat in the front row, smiling as if victory had already arrived. Maddie stood near the back, quiet, watching. Charles turned toward Ethan. Mr. Caldwell has spoken at length tonight about Brooks Atlantic's commitment to his expansion plan. Several investors nodded. Ethan recovered quickly. Yes, Charles. And as I was saying, our companies share a vision. Charles raised one hand. No, one word. Sharp enough to cut the room open. Ethan stopped. Charles faced the investors again. For clarity, Brooks Atlantic Voyages has signed no partnership agreement with Caldwell Resorts. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Ethan laughed nervously. We're discussing final details. No final details exist. Vanessa's smile vanished. Ethan looked toward the 3 board members standing beside the stage. None of them helped him. Then Charles said the sentence that changed everything. Perhaps the confusion comes from the fact that Mr. Caldwell has never actually negotiated with the person authorized to approve such an agreement. Ethan's jaw tightened. And who would that be? Charles looked past him, straight toward Maddie. The room followed his gaze. Maddie felt every eye turn. Her heart beat once, twice. The baby shifted beneath her hand. Charles smiled. Madeline Brooks. Ethan stared at his wife. For a moment, he looked almost amused. Maddie, Charles continued. Controlling shareholder of Brooks Atlantic Voyages. Silence. Executive chairwoman of the family holding company. Someone near the front whispered. What? Brooks Atlantic owns the Aurelia Crown, and Madeline controls the voting bloc that governs Brooks Atlantic. Vanessa slowly turned toward Ethan. Ethan did not move. The color drained from his face. His eyes traveled from Maddie to the Brooks Atlantic logo behind the stage, then to Captain Hale, then back to his wife. Pieces connecting too late. The restricted doors. The security officers who had ignored Vanessa. The mysterious owner's suite. The crew who somehow knew Maddie's name. You, Ethan whispered. Maddie walked forward. Her heels clicked softly against the marble. One step, then another. Nobody spoke. By the time she reached the front row, Phones had begun rising around the ballroom. Not because Maddie asked for attention, because people sensed the exact second power changed hands. Ethan descended from the stage. You own this ship? Maddie looked at him. The company owns the ship, and you own the company. I control it. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Vanessa stood abruptly. You told me Brooks Atlantic needed you. Ethan ignored her. His eyes remained fixed on Maddie. Why didn't you tell me? The question was almost astonishing. Maddie's expression stayed calm. Did you ever ask? His face hardened. You let me stand up there. Yes. You let me present the whole deal. Yes. You wanted to humiliate me. Maddie shook her head. No, Ethan. She looked toward the screen, still displaying his false partnership. You wanted an audience. The investors were whispering now. Several were already checking phones. Ethan stepped closer. Maddie, listen to me. We can fix this. She studied the man she had once loved enough to make herself smaller beside. Then she remembered what he had told her less than an hour earlier. You don't belong here. Maddie's eyes lifted to his. You said I didn't belong here. Ethan's face went still. She glanced around the ballroom. At the officers. The board. The ship carrying them through the dark Atlantic. Then back at him. I think we've finally established which one of us was mistaken. I'm not throwing him off the ship. Maddie's words surprised everyone, especially Ethan. For nearly 10 seconds, the ballroom remained frozen beneath the chandeliers. Investors whispered. Phones glowed and raised hands. Vanessa stood several feet away from Ethan now, as though distance could separate her from the disaster unfolding around him. Charles Whitmore leaned toward Maddie. You're certain? Yes. Ethan exhaled. Relief crossed his face too quickly. He thought mercy had arrived. It hadn't. Maddie turned toward the Brooks Atlantic attorney standing beside the stage. Daniel, please clarify the company's position. Daniel Mercer adjusted his glasses and stepped to the microphone. Brooks Atlantic Voyages has never entered negotiations, formal or informal, with Caldwell Resorts regarding the partnership presented tonight. The room tightened. Daniel continued. No memorandum of understanding exists. A pause. No letter of intent. Another pause. No authorization permitting Mr. Caldwell to represent Brooks Atlantic as his commercial partner. Each sentence removed another piece of Ethan's empire. Not physically. Something worse. Credibility. One investor in the front row closed the presentation folder Ethan had given him. Another stood and walked toward the exit. Ethan saw him. Martin, wait. The man didn't. A second investor approached Charles. Was Brooks Atlantic ever considering this deal? No. That single word traveled faster than any accusation. Ethan stepped toward the microphone. This is being blown out of proportion. These were preliminary discussions. Maddie looked at him. With whom? He stopped. Nobody moved. Name the person you negotiated with. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. Vanessa stared at him. You told me the agreement was basically finished. It was going to be. That isn't what you said. Her voice had changed. Gone was the champagne confidence. Now there was fear. Ethan turned toward Maddie. You could approve it tonight. And there it was. The truth. He still believed the problem was merely paperwork. That his wife would protect him because she always had. Maddie slowly shook her head. No, Ethan stepped closer. Maddie, think about what you're doing. I am. You'll destroy Caldwell Resorts. No, her voice remained quiet. You presented a partnership that did not exist. You invited these people here. You made the promises. She glanced toward the investors. I'm only telling them the truth. That was the moment the room changed. Not when they learned Maddie owned the ship. Not when Ethan's lie was exposed. Now, because everyone understood she was not attacking him. She did not need to. Ethan had constructed his own collapse. Maddie was simply refusing to stand underneath it. Across the ballroom, phones began vibrating. Messages, emails, calls. One investor quietly told his associate to suspend due diligence. Another asked for his legal team immediately. A third removed the Caldwell Resorts proposal from his briefcase and left it on an empty chair. Paper. That was all Ethan's grand future had become. Vanessa watched the exits. Then she looked at Ethan. You said these people needed you. They do. No, her eyes shifted toward Maddie. They needed her. Ethan's face hardened. Vanessa. But she was already removing the key card to their suite from her purse. She placed it on a cocktail table. I'm not going down with you. She walked away. Ethan did not follow. For the first time all evening, nobody stood beside him. Maddie felt her daughter move beneath her palm. Gentle this time. Almost peaceful. Ethan looked around the ballroom he had entered as a millionaire promising everyone the future. Now people would barely meet his eyes. You planned this, he whispered. Maddie shook her head. No, Ethan. She looked at the false partnership still glowing across the giant screen. You did. Then she turned toward Captain Hale. Let Mr. Caldwell remain aboard until we reach Miami. Ethan stared at her. You're letting me stay? Maddie met his eyes. Yes. Because throwing him out would have made him a victim. Keeping him aboard meant he had to spend the rest of the voyage surrounded by the truth. And some consequences were heavier when nobody pushed you. You simply had to stand beneath them. Was any of it real? Ethan asked the question at sunrise. The Aurelia Crown had returned to Miami beneath a pale gold sky, its enormous hull sliding toward the terminal while tugboats moved silently alongside it. Maddie stood near the private gangway. One hand rested over her belly. The other held a thin cream envelope, a draft divorce petition and a letter from her attorney. Not revenge, not a threat, the beginning of a legal ending. Ethan approached slowly. He looked different from the man who had boarded 2 days earlier. Same expensive suit, same polished shoes, but the confidence was gone. Overnight, 3 investors had formally withdrawn from the Caldwell Resort's expansion. 2 lenders had requested emergency meetings. His board wanted explanations. Vanessa had moved into another cabin and left the ship before sunrise without speaking to him. For the first time in years, Ethan had nobody left to blame who still wanted to listen. Maddie, she turned. He stopped several feet away. I know you hate me. I don't. That answer seemed to hurt more. I made mistakes. You made choices. His eyes dropped toward the envelope. What is that? My attorney sent notice to yours this morning. Ethan understood. His face tightened. You are filing for divorce? Maddie nodded. The email said you wanted to wait until after the baby. She held out the envelope. I decided not to. Silence. A docking line struck the pier below with a heavy snap. Ethan stared at her. You read my emails? Yes. So you planned everything? No. Maddie looked toward the city. I plan to take this voyage because Brooks Atlantic has a board meeting next week. She turned back. You brought Vanessa. You announced the false partnership. You hired the attorney. You decided our marriage was over before you had enough courage to tell me. Her voice never rose. That was what made every sentence impossible to fight. Ethan stepped closer. I was angry, confused. Vanessa made me feel important. He stopped. Maddie knew the answer. So did he. For years, she had loved the frightened man beneath Ethan's ambition. The man who once ate takeout with her on an apartment floor because they could not afford furniture. The man who promised that if success ever came, they would remember who they had been before it. Success came. Memory didn't. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. I can fix this. Maddie looked at him. Not with anger. With sadness. You still think everything is a deal. His eyes filled. What about our daughter? You'll be her father. And us. There is no us left to negotiate. The gangway opened. Passengers began moving toward the terminal. Ethan looked at the Aurelia Crown around him as if seeing it for the first time. Then he asked quietly, was any of it real? Maddie knew what he meant. Their marriage. The years. The woman he thought he knew. She looked through the glass toward the ocean. The ship was. Ethan almost laughed. Instead, his eyes closed. Captain Hale approached. Mrs. Brooks, we're ready for departure preparations. Ethan looked up. Departure? The ship leaves again this afternoon, Maddie said. You're staying aboard? For the board meeting. Ethan glanced toward the gangway, then back at her. He finally understood. He was the one leaving. Maddie was not throwing him out. There were no guards dragging him away. No applause. No cameras waiting for his humiliation. He simply no longer had a place beside her. Ethan stepped onto the gangway. Halfway across, he turned. Maddie stood beneath the morning light, blonde hair moving softly in the ocean wind, one hand protecting the child he had nearly built his new life around abandoning. He waited for her to look back. She didn't. Hours later, the Aurelia Crown sounded its horn. Deep. Final. Ethan stood behind the terminal glass as the ship eased away from Miami. For several seconds he did not move. He simply stared, stunned, while the woman he had treated as an obstacle remained aboard the world he had never bothered to understand. Maddie stood on the upper deck with one hand over their daughter and her eyes on the horizon. She never turned toward the terminal. Water widened between them. Ethan finally understood the cruelest part of losing her. She had not taken his company, his money, or his future. She had only stopped carrying him into hers. Some people believe power meant owning the ship. Maddie had learned something better. Power was knowing when to sail on without someone who had already chosen to leave.